Hello, everyone. I am here to share my story and talk about the toughest phase of my life, losing my job, earning a notorious reputation for being a violent man, and fighting 4 legal cases, all because of my wife's false allegation of me being a violent and abusive man. She spread rumors about me that I hit her and my little son because of my temper issues. She did all this to get away from me. The only thing she didn't do was ask me to divorce her, and I would have done that. But she chose to stir up so much drama that it ruined 3 lives, mine, hers, and our son's. I am a 42-year-old male who lost his job after a fatal car accident a few months ago. My car crashed, injuring my hip bone and right leg. I had to undergo surgery to replace my joints, which had been severely damaged in an accident. My wife, let's call her Sarah, was my biggest support during that time. We have been married for 6 years and have a 4-year-old son. I was advised to complete bed rest for a few months after my accident. Sarah worked as a teacher in a high school. Hence, it was challenging for her to manage the house and her job, look after me, and take care of our son. So my mother decided to stay with us until I was back on my feet. Sarah and my mother didn't get along well. My mother would always criticize her for not doing enough, and she would respond with an equally rude reply of minding her own business or looking after her own house. I had second doubts about my mother staying with us and communicated that to Sarah. She was also concerned that mother would create a new drama and everything. But on the other hand, Sarah needed help. I had lost my job, and with Sarah's income alone, we couldn't afford to have a full-time maid or a nurse to look after me. Thus, we had no choice but to accept my mother's help. I was growing anxious about the new situation, but Sarah comforted me and told me it's not forever and that she would try not to reply. I was relieved that maybe they both would get along together. My mother was an incredible help. She looked after me, cleaned the house, cooked, and even helped Sarah with other chores. She hadn't said anything mean or harsh to my wife, and I was super grateful to her. But then after a few weeks, things took a south turn. Sarah had to stay late after school for an upcoming program. She worked till 6 or 7 p.m., which bothered my mom. So when Sarah returned one day, my mother lost it and said miserable things to her for not being earned about my health or being incompetent for ignoring her only child. Sarah lost her temper and asked my mother to stay out of her business. This conversation became heated and I had to intervene. Meanwhile, I requested my mom not to be so harsh with Sarah. She was juggling a lot of things. That incident had created a wedge between my wife and mother, and they had stopped talking. I tried to break the ice, but it always backfired, with either my mom or Sarah passing a sarcastic remark that triggered the other to respond with something harsh. Finally, one day, Sarah came to me and requested to ask my mother to leave. I told her it would become impossible to manage everything alone. But she said she could manage everything once my mother was out of the house. I politely talked to my mother and asked her to return to her house. But she didn't take it really well. Instead, she became angry at me for hanging on to every word Sarah said. She left quite angrily and told me she was very upset with me. She didn't call for a month because she was so upset that I asked her to leave. I now realize that it was a grave mistake on my part. And I shouldn't have done it, because now when I look back, I guess this was when things started falling apart for me. From the following day, Sarah woke up early to manage house chores, cook, wake up our son for school, etc. When he would return from work, she would be so exhausted that if I even asked her to help me change into my pajamas, she would lose it and start crying. I was no longer bedridden, but needed help while walking as my knee was still weak. I tried my best not to disturb her, but then she would realize that I needed help and she would come around. However, exactly 2 weeks later, Sarah lost her temper with me. She screamed at the top of her lungs and told me she was tired because of me. She said hurtful things about how I was a burden on her, and how she had to work hard to earn and run the house. I was devastated. I tried explaining to her that it wasn't my fault that I lost my job or had a terrible accident, but she was not in the mood to listen. Instead, she kept going on until I could no longer control, and I yelled at her and threw a vase on the ground to silence her. She gave me a black look and said I wanted to hit her with the vase, but I swear I had no intention of hurting her. I threw the vase out of anger. She angrily stormed out of the house and went to her sister's place. Sarah came back in the morning and she cried her eyes out. She felt guilty for saying terrible things to me and promised she wouldn't do it again. Things were back to normal between us, but only for a few days. It became Sarah's pattern to yell at me occasionally and remind me of how I depend financially on her. I felt pathetic staying in my apartment. And once my doctor gave me a clean bill of health, I started job hunting. I still have to use crutches to walk and I limp a little. But other than that, I am perfectly fine. I contacted my previous employer and friends to help me get a job even if it didn't pay much. I just wanted to stay out of the apartment, but nobody wanted to hire a lame man even for $8. Anyways, I kept looking for a job and patiently endured the bitter words of Sarah. Some days she would be so mean, but on a few days, she would ask for my forgiveness. I no longer believed her. I knew she was going through a lot, but she failed to understand that I suffered the most. I lost my job, my ability to walk properly, and the anxiety of unemployment. Finally, I got a job through the reference of Sarah's acquaintance. It didn't pay me like my previous job, but it was enough. I was ready to work 8 to 10 hours a day. I thought that now things would get better, but instead, they became worse. Sarah now compared me to her friends, or how some moms in her school were living a perfect life, going on vacations, buying expensive things, or never having to work. She victimized herself for working so hard to take care of herself and often said that she wouldn't marry me if she could return in time. I silently suffered all her verbal bullets, but sometimes, when things would become out of control, I would yell at her to ask her to stop or kick-bang my fist on the furniture. That would quiet her for a few minutes. But then I would get the label of being abusive to her. We both had lost interest in each other. We tried to talk as little as possible, so there would be no debate or fight in the house. Sarah spent more time at school, coming around 6 or sometimes even 7. She told me she had started giving private tuition to a student at her school. I told her that she could get caught as it was against the school policy for teachers to give private tuition to students, but she told me that the student had lost his mother and was lacking in studies. The father, Tom, fake name, had requested her to come and teach his son. I had no issues with it, but a few days later, I noticed her strange behavior. She would come back late and would get glued to her phone, and sometimes she would smile like an idiot looking at her phone screen. When I asked her, she always dodged the subject or said it was her colleague, or she read something funny on social media. She would get calls late at night and talk for at least 15 minutes before returning to bed. Once, I even caught her crying while speaking to someone. I asked her who she was talking to and she said it was her mother and she was unwell. Another thing that I noticed was that Sarah took extra care of herself. She went to the salon to get her hair fixed and her nails done. She also bought new dresses to wear when she went to give tuition. I honestly didn't mind. I was happy that she was doing things that made her happy. But I was not too fond of makeup when she started wearing it. I asked her why she dressed up so much when she went to tutor a 6th grade student. She became furious and told me we hadn't gone out much since my accident, so that she couldn't get ready. I remained quiet because I was sick of listening to her. I only endured her because of my sweet little son. Sarah started coming home late, and it was objectionable to me. I mean, what kind of tuition goes on for hours or till 10 p.m.? Once I was waiting for her and saw her step down from the front passenger seat of a luxurious black car. She smiled at the driver and entered the building. I was honestly clueless about what she was up to. When she came back, I asked her who had dropped her. And she told me it was Tom, who insisted that he drop her as it was too late. I calmly asked her to reduce her tuition hours to rest and spend time with our son, but she turned a deaf ear to me. I had figured that Sarah was going through the same thing as I. We both have started hating our home, which was once filled with so much love. So I didn't stop her or tell her to come early. I knew she wouldn't listen and torture me mentally with her never-ending list of complaints. A few days later, I got a message from my friend Liam on Facebook. Liam was my good friend and lived in another city, but I hadn't heard from him in a long time. His message was quite a surprise. He asked me if I was still with Sarah. That message was quite surprising, and I told him we were together. But why was he asking such a question? Liam told me he was in town and saw Sarah in a restaurant with someone else. I told her he must have seen someone else and mistaken her for Sarah. He agreed, but I couldn't dismiss the thought that Sarah was seeing someone behind my back. Probably Tom. I was so tempted to ask Liam who she was with. But that would make Liam think that my wife was cheating behind my back, and I was a moron who knew nothing. I decided to sort out this matter with Sarah. I told her about Liam's message, and she denied it. In fact, she told me that with her 2 jobs, she hardly had time to go for coffee, let alone dinner. I agreed and didn't press for much details. But a part of me knew that Sarah was lying, and maybe she was cheating on me. Anyways, I soon forgot about that incident. I tried to mend things with Sarah and planned a few dates for her, but she always turned me down. I once asked her to go to dinner, and she said she wasn't comfortable going out with me because of my crutches. I felt so miserable. How can my wife be ashamed of my crutches and my limping? From that day onwards, I stopped asking her out. I was devastated that my marriage was almost over. But still, I don't know why I clung to a tiny hope that Sarah would come around and get normal with me. A few days later, Sarah told me she was going to her sister's place to spend the weekend as her sister's husband was out of town. She asked me to look after our son. I agreed but found it weird because Sarah always took our son with her to her sister's place as he used to enjoy playing with his cousins. Anyways, I didn't question much and let her go. But a day later, my son missed her crying constantly to see Sarah. I decided to call Annie, my wife's sister, and ask if I could come to her place. But to my surprise, Annie told me that she and her family were out of town. I was shocked to my core. I told her Sarah was supposed to be with her, but she informed me that she didn't know about her plans. I was worried about where Sarah was, so I called her, and she picked up her phone after a few rings. I asked her where she was, and she said she was with Annie. I wanted to slap her for lying to me and told her I was coming over to Annie's place because our son wanted to meet her. She was dumbfounded and told me not to come. I insisted that I was coming because I wanted her to tell me the truth. And finally, she blurted out that she was out of the city with her friends. I disconnected my phone and was furious at her for lying and not caring about her son. When Sarah came back, she tried reasoning with me. She said she went out with her friends to clear her head. I told her that she could have told me the truth, but she started making lame excuses that I wouldn't have allowed Hall or would have forced her to take our son with her. I got furious with her because she should have told me the truth. She started yelling in my face and even hit me on the chest, so I had no right to boss her around. I grabbed her shoulders and pushed her away from me, but she fell on the floor and created a huge scene and accused me of deliberately pushing her on the floor because I was violent. She even threatened to file a case against me for domestic abuse. It took me 3 to 4 minutes to register what she said. Why would I abuse her? I only pushed her away so she would stop hitting me. I was now 100% sure my wife was seeing someone. So I decided to find out who he was and to talk to him myself. I was broke, so I couldn't hire an investigator or a hacker to hack her phone. So I ordered small voice recording devices online and hid them in the kitchen, where she often went to answer her late-night calls. I wanted to know who she was talking to behind my back. I stopped talking to Sarah and ignored her as if she didn't live in my house, and she was pretty happy about it. Her late-night tuition continued. She spoke for long hours and avoided me completely. She even went out on weekends with her friends. And then finally, I learned who she was seeing behind my back. I retrieved the memory card from the device and inserted it into my laptop, and I was shocked to learn that my wife was having a full-fledged affair with a student's father. Tame, and tuition was only an excuse so they could meet and spend time together. I heard my wife telling Tom that I beat her and financially abused her and she wanted a divorce from me. I was shocked that she could have asked me if she wanted a divorce. At this point, my love evaporated, and certainly I didn't want to spend an eternity with her. She shouldn't have spread false things about me. I had had enough of this woman, so when she returned from her tuition or sleeping session, I confronted her and she was shocked. She started crying and told me that she connected with Tom because I could not treat her like I used to before my accident. She was exhausted from her job and household conditions. So she started an affair with Tom. At first, it was just friendship, and Tom requested her to help his son with his studies. But later on, they became more than friends. I told her I'd inform the school management, and she threatened to file a domestic violence case. I was so angry at her that I told her to do whatever she could. The next day, I was fired from my job. The employer Sarah's friend's husband told me Sarah had informed them that she would file for a domestic violence case. Thus, they didn't want to keep any violent employees. I begged him not to fire me and tried explaining that Sarah was lying so she could get back at me for catching her red-handed about her affair. I was done with Sarah and needed concrete proof to humiliate her and file for divorce. I tried to unlock her phone, but it was of no use. Luckily, she had forgotten her laptop at home. I opened it and prayed that she hadn't changed her password. I opened the browser and she hadn't logged out of WhatsApp from her laptop. It was honestly my lucky day. One of few in last few years. I went through her entire chat with Tom and was devastated that it all started when I hadn't even healed properly. She had slept several times with him and had exchanged nude pictures with each other. I downloaded all the images, took screenshots of their filthy messages, and decided to take revenge. Sarah's school has a private group on Facebook where parents can ask questions or share their concerns. I joined that group with a fake name and wrote a long post on how some teachers should be fired as they eyed students' father and started affairs with them. My long post invited many comments, and people were curious to learn who those teachers were, and they should be named and shamed. I got my cue, and without hesitation, I posted all the images and messages of my wife and Tom on the group. The post got a crazy amount of comments, likes, and shares. The parents even started a conversation about how Tom was a flirt, and tried getting into the pants of every other teacher. In just an hour, Sarah called me and told me that she was filing a case of domestic violence against me and I should be ready to face the consequences. I didn't pay attention to her and decided to make her life more miserable. I contacted a few lawyers and they suggested I file a defamation case against my wife and for my son's custody. According to my lawyers, I could prove that my wife couldn't take care of our son because of her unstable relationship issues. Sarah and I are still fighting 4 cases: a domestic violence case, a divorce case, a defamation case, and one for the custody of our child. I hope she is strictly fined or punished for using the domestic violence card to get whatever she wants. So people, if you are going through divorce or relationship crises, be thankful that you are not in my shoes and you didn't marry a manipulative bitch like my wife, who was hungry for attention when her husband was going through so much physical and emotional turmoil. Let me know what you think about today's story in the comments. Do you think that revenge was too harsh or maybe not harsh enough? One more thing, most of you are not subscribed. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the video. Everything helps for the algorithm.